Welcome. I am Andrea Hable, Vice President of the League of Women Voters of the Woodbury Cottage Grove area. The purpose of the League, national, state, and local, is to empower voters and defend democracy. For more than 100 years, the League of Women Voters has been a trusted source for nonpartisan voter registration, education, and a long-standing witness to Minnesota's proud tradition of voter access and election integrity. The League's mission is to encourage informed and active participation of citizens in government, work to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influence public policy through education and advocacy. The League strengthens our communities by promoting voter registration, conducting candidate forums, and informing voters on public policy through education. We invite you to visit our website, lvwmn.org, to learn about the statutes, best practices, and safeguards associated with Minnesota elections on our Elections 411 page. Follow the link to Vote 411 for a one-stop shop for all your election needs, personalized to you, including a voter's guide. We hope all of our candidates here tonight have submitted their information to the voter guide. And now I'll turn it over to Jodi Ritacca, who is moderating today.
Thank you, Andrea. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And tonight's candidate forum is for the Legislature, District 53 for Senate, and the House 53B. All 5 candidates have been invited to participate this evening. And if a candidate is not participating, we will read a brief statement from the candidate. Either they did not respond or declined to participate without any editorial comment. So here are the rules for the evening this evening. So each candidate will have 1 minute for an opening statement, which we'll get to shortly. We'll rotate the order in which the candidates answer the questions. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer and 30 seconds for rebuttal. Questions have been submitted by voters to the League's email and during voter service events in the community. At the finish of the questions, each candidate will have 1 minute to do a closing statement, and we will reverse the order of the opening statements. So whoever does first in the opening will be second or at the end of the closing statements. The forum is being live streamed and broadcast by SWCTC and Town Square TV in Dakota County. Viewing audiences can submit questions by calling or texting the number displayed on the screen during the forum. The forum is being recorded and can be viewed until Election Day on SWCTC website and also on the Woodbury Cottage Grove Area League of Women Voters website. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our League of Women volunteers who will be our timekeepers tonight, and they are Tamara Medestad and Andrea Hable, who we just met a few minutes ago. So thank you for your time for doing this service. And the forum, as I mentioned, will be recorded and can be viewed until Election Day. So each will hold up signs, our timekeepers, to indicate 30 seconds or 15 seconds remaining, and then there is a sign for stop when your time has expired. So let's begin by introducing our candidates. Our Senate candidates for District 53 are Matt Klein and Chris Walsh. And for the House District 53B is Rick Hansen and Stephen Sabota. And we'll begin with our opening statements. And we'll begin with Rick Hansen.
Thank you. My name is Rick Hansen, and I want to make sure I thank the League of Women Voters for this opportunity tonight. It's really important. Every 10 years, Minnesota goes through redistricting, and there are new legislative districts throughout Minnesota. Here, the district I'm running for is Newport, St. Paul Park, Cottage Grove, south of 61 generally, northern Gray Cloud Island Township, northern Inver Grove Heights, and all of South St. Paul. So it's a new and unique district, and I'm asking for your support for that district. I serve in the legislature currently. I chair the Environment Committee. I work a lot on water quality and air quality issues. Believe strongly in public education, and I'm asking for your support to continue that effort as we move forward in Minnesota.
Next candidate, Matt Klein.
Well, thank you so much to the League of Women Voters. My name is Matt Klein, and I've represented Northern Dakota County in the State Senate since 2016. When I'm not at the legislature, I'm a physician at Mayo Clinic, and I've tried to bring that voice of science and reason and truth to the legislature in my duties there. I've used my position as a physician to try to make healthcare more affordable in this state through offering a public health insurance option and trying to regulate drug prices so that Minnesotans can afford their medications. I'm on the Taxes Committee, and I've tried to fight inflation by eliminating the tax on Social Security income and offering property tax relief so that people can stay in their homes. I believe firmly that we need to defend a woman's right to choose her form of health care. I believe we need to fight climate change by moving towards a carbon zero state. And I know we need to fully fund our schools and provide mental health supports to our kids as they emerge from the pandemic. I'd lastly like to fully fund our police force and maintain and train the most professional police force in the nation so that citizens can feel safe in their homes. Thank you.
And next candidate is Chris Walsh.
It's Roush. I think there's a
Roush.
W that got in there. But yeah, my name is Chris Roush. I grew up in Burnsville, Minnesota, born in St. Paul. I'm a film school graduate, kind of been around the world quite a bit. Made my way back to Minnesota. I currently am married to a beautiful young woman and have a little girl, and work in education, specifically in transportation. So I work to secure safe transport for about 8,000 students within Minnesota every day. And there's a lot going on in our world. I think there's a lot of symptoms that we're experiencing, but we need to get to a little bit of the heart as well, with some heart posture in addition to addressing those symptoms. So started going to caucus and met a lot of great people and want to get involved, and here to talk about the issues and value people along the way. So that's
Thank
pretty
you.
much the go.
And Stephen Svoboda is out of town on business and unable to be here tonight, and here is his opening statement, which I will read now. My name is Stephen Svoboda, and I'm running to be your next state representative. I'm a proud father, a manufacturer engineer, and a leader in our community. I serve on the Board of Trustees at Gateway Christian Church and as a dean leader at PAC 9095 in South St. Paul. For over a decade, I've been engaged in the local level promoting the ideals of faith, family, and freedom. As a manufacturer engineer, my job demands finding innovative solutions to tough problems. Over the past 2 years, our businesses have been shattered, more manufacturing has moved overseas, and good-paying jobs have moved out of state. All the while, we are paying more in taxes than any our neighboring states, and it's time to put Minnesota first. We need solutions, eliminating taxes, slashing regulations, and fighting to keep our money in Minnesota. It is with heavy heart that I'm not able to be here with you tonight. Unfortunately, my job required my presence. I am honored to have been entrusted with the responsibility to run and humbled to ask for your support in the November election. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to my campaign or check out us online at SvobodaForHouse.com. And that is the end of his statement. So now will we begin our questions. The first question is on budget and finance. The 2022 legislative session ended with no action on the remaining $7.2 billion state surplus. What do you believe the state should do with the surplus when deciding how to spend taxes, and how will you balance the needs in your constituents with those outside your district? And candidate Matt Klein.
It's a great question. We left $11 billion on the table at the end of last session, which was a huge disappointment, not only to the people of this district, but to me personally as a legislator. I was prepared to vote for a tax bill which would have eliminated the tax on Social Security and offered property tax relief across every person in this district. I think that's the type of thing we need to do immediately to provide relief to Minnesotans. We also need to fully fund our schools and address the mental health crisis among young people as these schools emerge from the pandemic. And we need to make healthcare more affordable in this state by offering a public option. Those are the things I think are our top priorities. I would also like to fully fund and move towards a carbon zero state by incentivizing green industry.
Next, candidate Rick Hansen.
So I think there's a mixture of things that can be done, and one of the few bills that did pass during the session was the lottery bill, the Environmental Trust Fund, and I negotiated that with my Republican counterpart. in the Senate. We were able to pass that in the Senate unanimously, and in the House with very few votes against it. So in negotiations, I have been able to work with the other side and be able to pass things. What we need to look at is restoring funds to funds that have been rated. There are a series of landfill funds that have been rated in the past that have never been paid back. We need to make sure we're equalizing property taxes, so property poor districts, when they raise a levy, they do not bring in the amount of revenue that property rich districts do. So it's called levy equalization, but think of it as providing fairness with property taxes. That takes money, and that can help support older school districts, older buildings, and places where we need more investment.
Next candidate, Chris Rasha.
Roush.
Roush.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. Yeah, layered, it deserves a layered response a little bit. I mean, there's a lot to talk about specifically with a surplus when it comes to taxes. I'm for Minnesotans, and I'm for those who are getting hit hard in their bank accounts. I think we all can agree to that. And I look long term in addition to the short term as there are things to address in the immediacy right now. What builds wealth in the long term for those that are working hard every day, multiple jobs, less taxes? I think across the board it's less taxes. So I know a lot of people feel the same, that I've been out door knocking and chatting with individuals. That's where it comes down to. I want a strong community that has money in their pocket, and I believe that they have the liberty to spend it the way they do. But we also need to address the issues where we can come together and do more with a balanced budget, not a surplus, simply a balanced budget across the board.
Any rebuttals? Moving on to the next question. With public safety, many are concerned with increased gun violence in our communities. What legislation, if any, would you support to help reverse this current trend and respond to the need for safer communities? And candidate Chris.
So I believe in responsible gun ownership. The moment somebody crosses the line to victimize someone in any way, shape, or form, I think you give up a lot of your rights. We're not a community built on stepping over people's liberty, the way they want to live their life, their family, safe schools, safe neighborhoods. And I think it comes down to having a strong walking out of the laws that are in place. Murder is already wrong, and more laws is not going to steer the hearts of those that are choosing that. So we got to address mental health. We got to address our community. We got to support our police. The defund the police movement is an absolute the wrong way to go about that. They are doing their jobs out there. They're massively against pretty much what culture is experiencing right now and saying about them. And I know as those that are very close to me who run into fires and have been shot at and come home and cry to their wives or their spouses, they need our support. So from a judicial standpoint, that needs to be addressed. It's not happening.
Candidate Matt Klein.
Thank you, Jodi. Yeah, I appreciate the specific question about gun violence, especially as a physician. I am a gun owner, and I've gone hunting, actually with Rick Hansen here, and yet I'm a proud author of the two major initiatives in the legislature to curtail gun violence, one being the red flag laws, which provides our community with a specific remedy to suicide, which is such a big part of gun violence in Minnesota, and universal background checks, which we have pushed for years. But you know, curtailing gun violence and crime of all sorts in our state does involve fully funding, sustaining, and professionally training our law enforcement and standing with them and standing behind them. And in return, we should expect from them the most professional behavior so that all Minnesotans feel that their dignity is respected and their rights are protected. So those are the things I would push for in the legislature.
And candidate Rick.
You know, I think a lot about the tragedy of gun violence, and you know, the world that I grew up in is a lot different. I think I bought my first shotgun at a gun show when I was probably 16, 17 years old, and that gun show was in a school building. You know, it was a different world, and I think red flag laws, like Senator Klein mentioned, are important. I support those. I think, I am a hunter, but I think, I took the hunter safety training back when I was a teenager. And perhaps just like driver's licenses, we need safety training ongoing as you go through life. The red flag laws are important, but I would also look at maybe requiring, if it takes 21 to be buying tobacco, maybe it's 21 to buy a gun as well. It's a different world.
Thank you. On to our next question, having to do with health care. Given the recent Supreme Court ruling regarding Roe versus Wade, state legislatures may be enacting new laws regarding women's reproductive health issues, including access to care and abortion. Do you support the current Minnesota constitutional right to an abortion? What measures, if any, do you think the Minnesota Legislature should enact related to current laws and government policies related to abortion? And candidate Rick.
You were referencing the Doe versus Gomez decision, and that as a Supreme Court ruling, it could be overturned by a future Supreme Court. So I would support codifying Doe versus Gomez to provide support for abortion care that is health care.
Matt?
Yeah, and thank you to Rick for clarifying. The questioner asked if we would protect the constitutional right to an abortion in Minnesota, and unhappily, currently it is not a constitutional right. I think that the voters of Minnesota may support such a constitutional amendment, and I would be glad to offer such for the voters to consider in referendum. As a physician, I stand proudly behind a woman's right to choose her own form of health care, both for personal autonomy and health care liberty, but also as a public health measure, because we know that outlawing abortions leads to more nefarious means of accomplishing the same end. So I'm glad to stand up for that.
Thank you. Chris?
I think there's a precedent within our culture that is devaluing human life. And for me, as someone who's lost a little one, the space of a baby in the womb, and it is a baby, it's not a clump of cells, and if I am on the floor at any point and somebody walks into the room face down, they walk up to me and do what? They check for a pulse. And they go either he's alive or he's not. And I think that's a very, needs to be said. It's people in this space of pro-choice and pro-life is 9 months to inception, and nobody's having this conversation of what are we really talking about here, because it's very broad and not very specifically addressed, and it requires lengthy conversations, more than a 60-second response. But I am pro-life, and that's not without empathy to horrific situations with a child. Just it requires a little lengthier response than this. But that's, as far as Minnesota, I will aim to protect every life, even the mother and the child.
Thank you, Chris. Another question on healthcare. What is your position in ensuring that all Minnesotans have access to affordable healthcare? And that goes to Chris.
Man, it seems everything costs more day by day, and industries are growing, whether it's the Food and Drug Administration or food industry or the medical industry, and our government. Everything is getting bigger and is maybe more powerful. And it seems like the rights or the individual that we're representing is growing smaller and smaller. It's a dimming light. And specifically with what things cost, my wife has a degenerative eye disease. Those shots can cost $9,000 to $11,000. There's no way I could afford that. I don't know why that medication needs to be that expensive. It's a every 6 weeks shot. So it's a very sensitive situation to something I experience all the time, and whether it's my family or my grandma or different things, neighbors, it's an incredibly important conversation. It needs to be subsidized in some way, or it needs to be held, medical space needs to be held more accountable.
Thank you. Rick?
I think with differentiating the difference between health care and health insurance is important. And I actually agree with Chris on something that, monopolization of health insurance monopolization in businesses. And that's kind of where the public option comes in, is that it provides competition. So if you only have one provider in an area of health care, or you only have one provider of health insurance, then the price can go up. And so providing that competition with a public option provides some help there. I also think we have to look at environmental health considerations and prevention, whether it's in the environment or whether it's in healthcare. Prevention is better than cleanup. It's better to prevent problems from occurring before they happen. And so we can do so much in that area, but we need to have that competition that comes from the public option to make that happen.
Thank you. Matt?
Yeah, so I've been proud to be the chief author of Governor Walz's One Care proposal in the legislature during my time there, which would offer a public health insurance option that would be affordable and good health care coverage for all Minnesotans to access. I've also been an author on a bill that would regulate and investigate the price of pharmaceuticals in this state. You know, if somebody has an epinephrine pen to save their kid from a bee sting allergy, and we know that that costs 3 cents to manufacture but is billed at $600, that's a crime. That's an unethical situation for our patients and for our providers in this state. We have the ability to set up a legislative panel that would investigate the change in that price and impose penalties if necessary, and I will continue to fight for that at the legislature. I've also proven that I've been able to accomplish more practical bipartisan solutions, and in the last session I was an author on the bipartisan reinsurance bill, which has held down health insurance rates for Minnesotans.
Thank you. Another healthcare question. Should the state invest in more mental health resources, and if so, how should that be done? And that goes to Matt.
All right. Yes, we should. You know, this has been a trying time for everybody the last 3 years, but I think we've seen in particular for our young people, it's been a time of crisis. And as they emerge from the pandemic, none of us are the same people that we were going in, but clearly our youth have been through something fairly traumatic and significant. And that has ripple effects in every segment of Minnesotans' lives. Mental health services in the schools have been proven to be an incredibly effective mechanism to reach the resources to the kids who need it. It's accessible, it's friendly, it's someone you know. And subsidizing that is a bill I've been proud to be an author of, and I would continue to direct funds that way, particularly in a season of surplus.
Rick?
I would agree, you know, that investment in schools with public health, with mental health as public health is really important. We can also, you know, providing for those in-school counselors is important as well. I think looking at in precedent that we have in state government, we currently have a program that provides mental health assistance to farmers, where there's a hotline people can call in, farmers or rural folks can call in. I think that's a model that we can use for other occupations, particularly for police and fire and first responders. We look at the trauma that's gone on in the last few years that all of us have faced. But if we have a model that's working for farmers, we could use that same model that's available for law enforcement, for firefighters, for first responders, for doctors, for teachers. I mean, we can replicate that same thing and provide that assistance. And we should try.
Thank you. Chris?
I think this is more of a culture question than anything. The government or a representative is not going to make probably the gains to address this more so than the family. And I think coming from a standpoint of example and how to lead and champion and support families across the board, single parents, and the nuclear family is the most important thing. So if there's ways to get, you know, we work ourselves to death 5 days a week most of the time, and maybe for you guys and myself as well, a lot more hours than that. Is there a way to bring some of our parents home on Fridays or maybe stay late on Mondays? And I know we've in a precedent of working mobile, but that also has some huge challenges too. We went through a shutdown, and I think the costs were not really foreseeable what that was going to do just across the board. So it's something we have to tackle with some immediacy, and also strong character with men and women coming alongside kids daily.
Thank you. Next question has to do with education. If elected, what would you do to ensure that funding of our public schools adequately keeps up with inflation and growth? And that goes to Rick.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I think there is an equity in the system that is based on the property values. And so for keeping up with that, if you can keep going back to a levy to try to raise things, and it won't raise things enough. And so property-rich districts have an advantage. And so we try, if we're going to provide additional state dollars, we've got to provide that so that every kid has an opportunity that is not going to be based on their zip code or the wealth of the property around them. And so we have a model, we have that equalization model, we need to do that. I think of in this district, we have old buildings. We have the Newport Elementary School here that is successful. And why close that down? We have 2 elementary schools in South St. Paul. These are old buildings. Let's upgrade them just like this building. Let's upgrade those schools so that they can be modern and useful and community schools that people can value even more than they do now.
Chris?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of amazing teachers. There's a lot of amazing information, curriculum at the fingertips of our education system. But to my knowledge and in my research, seeing us throw money time and time again only illuminates the problem. It's not getting it done. Our graduation rates and test scores and mental health issues, suicides, there's something more going on there than just a curriculum or kids making it into a classroom every day and improving the surroundings of the classroom. We got to invest in people, and I think that if there's a split that we can do with the money that's at hand to, like Rick is saying, I don't have very much disagreement, but supporting our wealthy and maybe at risk or the districts that are challenged, but also following the kids and giving parents some choice to place their kids in a situation that they might feel is better equipped to handle the challenges they're facing.
Thank you. Matt?
Jodi, a strong public schools system has been the foundation of our economic strength in this state and our high quality of life for generations, and it's under threat. I've long been a believer we should return to the Minnesota miracle. We should fully fund our schools at the state level. Our current reliance on property taxes is not fair. It's not very good to communities that are property tax poor. Last night I was at a levy meeting in South St. Paul where they're trying to raise some money just to keep operations going and keep teachers employed at their schools during this time. This is in a season when we have $11 billion sitting on the table at the state level, and they have to go hat in hand to their property taxers payers to ask for more money this year. It's not the right way to handle it. It shows a failure to sort of dedicate ourselves to the importance of public education, and we should be fully funding this at the state level.
A rebuttal?
And just to follow up, I think, with one-time money, there are things that we could do with energy efficiency, solar on schools, building in those energy efficiencies that help not only the climate, but also reduce the cost in the long run, that they pay back on that investment. So when you're upgrading those school buildings, you can also use them as a demonstration of things that we can do, reduce the cost in the long run by putting in new technology, energy efficient windows, solar on the schools, electric vehicle charging stations, all of that.
Moving on to the next question about elections. As a member of the legislature, what measures, if any, would you support to reinforce or ensure voter confidence that our elections are secure and the results are accurate? And that goes, we begin with Matt.
Yeah, so I think the first answer to that question is to somewhat reject the premise. Our elections are secure, and they are accurate, and they are fair. And to suggest that they are not is part of this underlying big lie that we've been fighting against for the last several years. We need to affirm that and sustain it, and we need to say the truth. We need to say out loud that Joe Biden won the election in 2020, and that whoever wins this election that I'm in currently will be the winner, and transfer of power will accede peacefully thereafter. I've been along, we have the highest participation by voters in the country in Minnesota, and that's because we maintain high quality and accessible access to the ballot through mail-in voting, through drop box voting, through in-person early voting, and I will continue to defend those measures.
Chris?
I think a lot of people have questions, and those deserve honest conversations and looking at things together. I'm not concerned if Joe Biden or if Trump won. I'm concerned that we can all sit at a table and have an agreement that it all looks good. And that's where the discrepancy comes into. And I've seen with my own eyes a great many things that concern me, and I have questions, and many people start going down the path very quickly of how that's a conspiratorial space. And I'm going, I'm a human, I have a question, and I need it to be answered. And no one seems to want to answer it on one side of the aisle, and I'm not even getting to a vilified space. I'm coming to the table as an individual asking, what do you think about this? I've seen ballots pulled from underneath the table and fed into a machine, and I've also had a text come to me saying, thanks for voting, before I ever voted. Would you please tell your friends, go show up to the ballot box. I think getting to the ballot box on the day of election is a pretty special thing, and I think that's something to do together.
Thank you, Chris. Rick?
I trust our elections. I trust, going in on election day with all the volunteers that put in the time and effort and are so dedicated, regardless of party, being there, helping Minnesotans cast their vote. I trust the people at City Hall that we early voted because my son was going to the Boundary Waters this summer and wanted to vote in the primary election. I trusted them and all the signatures and the witnessing. I trust that votes are counted accurately. I trust that they're counted properly. And questioning just that people have questions without evidence, I think that we just have to make sure that we're being clear. We have a system that's run at the local level with volunteers who are doing a great job and have been for years. And we need to support that.
Thank you. Another question on elections. How will you ensure that election laws do not create barriers to Minnesota's right to vote? And that goes to Chris.
People get to the grocery store, people get to school, people get to work, people go visit their friends. And it seems around this space that there's some conspiracy to keep people away from the ballot box. And from what I've seen in my community, that couldn't be further from the case. It's, again, back to the questions that people have. There's a lot going on. And, I totally disagree with anyone who doesn't want to sit down and have those conversations. I think it's pretty simple to have high character and trust and truth and find common solutions. But when one side continually tells you that what you've seen should just be brushed off and they won't sit down, what is an individual supposed to do with that? So that's what I would say.
Thank you, Chris. Rick?
When you knock on doors, there are people who have a hard time getting to the door. There are people who are homebound. There are people who have mobility issues. My father-in-law can't see, he uses a white cane. Not everybody's able-bodied. And I think particularly with the disability community, we have to make sure we can make sure their right to vote is exercised. And that, as we go through this journey in life, not everything works all the time. And we get blizzards in November. And so I think the changes that have been made that have encouraged early voting and absentee voting have been good. And it's a choice. Nobody's requiring anybody to do early voting or absentee voting, but we have that availability there that works and is part of that whole sacred issue of voting. And we should make sure we continue to try to make sure those who have great difficulty voting are able to do so.
Thank you, Rick. Matt?
Yeah, so I've lost my parents in the last couple of years, like many of us have, and we cared for them in their homes during the last couple of years of their lives. They're severely disabled, but they were able to vote in the 2018 or 2020 elections. And when I hear that, if you're good enough to go to the grocery store, you should be good enough to go to the polls, it hits me a little personally and it feels a little callous. They were able to vote because they mailed in their ballot, and that's the way they spoke their voice of democracy. To sort of insist that they get themselves over to the polling station under all vicissitudes of November weather I think is the wrong answer. We've taken the right tack in Minnesota by having early voting, early in-person voting, mail-in ballots, drop boxes. Let's stick with that.
Thank you.
Rebuttal to that?
30 seconds.
Yep. Yeah, we're not far apart on those that need empathy, or for us to make great strides to include them in our election process. But we're talking about the generalization of mailing out ballots. I'm already getting things in the mail left and right, saying register early, do this. I think that's the wrong direction. I don't see a chain of custody. I don't see the ability to stand next to those that are in my community and go, yep, I voted, and I can follow that vote into the system and through the system. That's bigger questions than are being answered.
Thank you, Chris. Moving on to climate and environment, do you believe that the state has a role to play in reducing carbon emissions to address the changing climate? If so, what should the state do? And that goes to Matt.
Yeah, so I think once again here in Minnesota, we are going to have the warmest summer on record this summer. This is something that our children are alarmed and angry about and consider a failure of our older generation. We need to move rapidly, as Governor Walz has done, to address emissions, particularly from automobiles, to expand our electric vehicle infrastructure across the state so that those vehicles are convenient and can be used to get across the state. We need to expand transit so that people like myself who commute to Rochester for work can use mass transit instead of their own vehicles to do so. And we need to move rapidly towards eliminating gas producing engines.
Goes to Chris.
Yeah, there's no question we can all come together and be responsible with our environment. It's a simple thing. Pollution, we've seen videos of the massive oceans of plastic floating in our ocean, and oil spills. I also think we're very smart individuals, and coming together, doing that, accessing the resources that are here. We have so many resources within Minnesota, and to shut those down point blank and force people down a path that is way more cost inhibitive to their livelihoods, to their lifestyles, is a really tough thing to sit up anywhere and say people have to do. I believe in Matt and Rick sitting here. I don't have the authority to tell them how to live their lives. So I don't think the government should act in that way either. I think it should be a space of protecting their liberty and their livelihood, but offering up great solutions with wind, solar, power, gas, all across the board, and doing it as clean and efficient as possible.
Thank you, Chris. Rick?
I believe that climate change caused by humans is real. I believe that in order to keep our freedom to breathe and our freedom to live, we're going to have to take action that's going to require behavioral change as well as technological change. And we are not going to be able to rely on technological change to science our way out of this. We are going to have to make some changes in how we do things. That means very practical things, like why not have EV charging stations at the DMV when people come there? How about, I mentioned the schools earlier, retrofitting the school buses, redesigning our buildings so that they're more efficient, providing for transit, providing all these things. We're going to have a wide variety of things where we're going to have solar on our rooftops, we're going to have more wind, we're going to have different types of energy resources there because we'll have to decarbonize. And that's going to be very difficult in a very short period of time. But we do have a lot of creative people who can make this happen.
Thank you, Rick. Another question on climate and environment. What is your position on the Prove It First legislation that was introduced last year? It would require, to receive a Minnesota mining, it will require that a company must provide independent scientific proof that a copper-nickel mine was operated commercially in a similar environment for at least 10 years and has been closed for at least 10 years without causing pollution. So what is your position on this Prove It First legislation? And that goes to Rick.
I've generally been supportive of that, but we are not able to pass that in the Minnesota Legislature. And so when we're looking at protections, I think providing for financial assurance to make sure that the cleanup costs are borne by the companies versus being borne by the public up front is something that we should be able to find bipartisan support on. As chair of the Environment Committee, I don't have the votes to pass Prove It First. But I think we could have the votes to pass financial assurance and financial responsibility for mining companies. And it shouldn't just be the mining companies. It should be for giant feedlots and other corporate entities that we know are going to pollute and that the public shouldn't pay for the cleanup cost.
Thank you, Rick. Chris?
That all sounded pretty good to me. I think your actions matter, and the cause and effect of those actions matter. Specifically when it comes to tax dollars and how we move around money, the less burden upon an individual within our society is what I'm for. I'm largely unfamiliar with this space, so I'm not going to be audacious and throw anything around until I learn a little bit more about it. So I look forward to more of those conversations.
Thank you. Matt?
I certainly support what Rick says about making sure that companies that want to mine in Minnesota put forward a trust fund that would protect us in case there was an accident and could fully fund cleanup costs. That's something that we could do in a bipartisan way in the legislature. I'm a huge lover of the Boundary Waters canoe area. I canoe there myself. All 5 of my kids do. And it's a precious resource that, if despoiled, cannot be recovered. At the same time, I'm a little concerned with the Prove It First legislation, because I think our current system of environmental regulations and sort of bureaucratic hoops that these companies are asked to pass through is sufficient and adequate. And this would add another one. So I think we need to be cautious about that and thoughtful about that and ask ourselves if our current regulatory system is actually inadequate.
Thank you. Move on to another topic on childcare. A barrier to workforce participation is available affordable childcare. What, if any, is the legislature's role in addressing this? And that goes to Chris.
That's a big conversation, because you're essentially meddling in the lives of a parent. Absolutely, we need to figure out how to help and assist where we can. There's a lot of childcare options out there. There's a lot of not great childcare options out there too. There's a lot of expensive childcare options out there. So it's a big conversation. We live in a society that we work ourselves to death. And if we want to talk about a 4-day work week, I mean, it's more of a cultural question is what you're asking than anything. It's how do we get away from working, achieving, and getting to the space of being. And maybe that would start to fix our community and address a lot of mental health issues and education. Like, we got to start being among one another versus trying to champion just a policy or a program over and over to find some solution that I think we could solve in other ways.
Thank you, Chris. Matt?
Yeah, and actually I agree with Chris on the bigger societal question. The reason that we had difficulties with child care assistance in this generation is because families have been forced into the situation where they have dual earners. It's no longer sustainable to have a single earner. And that maybe wouldn't be the case if we had livable wages in this state, if employees had sufficient time off or paid family leave. These are measures that could enlarge opportunity for families to raise their kids. Having said that, we are where we are, and the Child Care Assistance Program has been hugely effective at allowing families to continue to work and allowing them to get adequate child care, and I continue to support that program.
Thank you. And Rick?
You know, when we invest in kids, we have a lifetime of benefits that are from that. And having, gone through this, and the cost is just unimaginable for childcare. It's just, you used to think of the college loans, but you got folks that are getting out and have their higher education loans, and then they suddenly get into this system where they have to pay huge costs for childcare. And we've got to find some way of providing that support and providing those services, that people who are in childcare, providing childcare support, they can burn out too. I mean, we're all just kind of exhausted after the last 3 years, and we've got to find some ways with the funds that we have that we can't, I don't know why we can't find some support there to reduce those costs for parents that are having to use childcare and choosing to use that, and making sure that it doesn't break their back.
Thank you. Another question, what is your position on the use of speed cameras to address the problem of speeding and reckless driving in Minnesota? And that would go to Rick.
It seems that the roads are more dangerous, and that I'm just kind of surprised when I'm driving now, the actions that people take on the road. That being said, I'm cautious of cameras everywhere, and on the process of that. So I'm a little reluctant on providing camera enforcement, but maybe it is the retraining and the recertification on the licenses or something, but people are taking a lot of risks out there on the road, and I'm not sure if cameras are going to solve that.
Thank you, Rick. Chris?
Yeah, it sounds like not in the terms of like Big Brother, but growing something that's going to cost a whole lot of money, and we'd probably do better to address people personally and talk about what we're responsible for. I mean, I'm in transportation and I'm in safety, and when I walk into a room and I'm talking to people who get in a van every day, which is an amazing privilege, but also something to steward. The lives of little ones getting in, first graders, would I put my daughter in their vehicle? Never rush, never cut corners. This is about safety. It's a huge space of concern, but yeah, putting cameras on every corner and on every street lamp, and I don't think that's the best way to go about things or spend our dollars. And I hope the guys sitting next to me would agree on that one too.
Thank you, Chris. Matt?
I'll take the contrary position. So when people were very concerned a couple of summers ago about rising crime levels in our state, I met with my police chief and asked her, what solutions could we harness to make the job of police officers easier and to use law enforcement in a way that was clearly equitable and not discriminatory. And speeding cameras were something that she mentioned in particular. It off-burdens, small offenses from law enforcement. It is clearly not susceptible to systemic bias, and I think it's probably an idea worth exploring.
Thank you, Matt. We're getting down to the final questions here in general. If elected, what would be your top priorities, your top 3 priorities, and why? And we begin with Rick.
Well, I think protecting democracy is really important, because if we don't have a democracy, all the other things going through the public process don't work. And we've covered some of the topic areas already, and that is climate and environment are really important. We didn't talk about PFAS or PFAs very much, but that is a huge issue. We've lowered the standard, or the standards have been lowered in terms of their impacts. We have to look at what does that mean for our communities. So environment, climate, but also infrastructure. We have old communities, sewer and water, tree replacement, building replacement, building upgrades, those are all important. So democracy, climate and environment, and infrastructure.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, should it be such a privilege and an honor to sit up at the Capitol and then walk the streets of the community, I would hope weekly. I'm not sure how much time that would actually allow, but economy, education, and public safety. Specifically the economy, we have amazing business owners who are hit really, really hard. I disagree in the utmost with saying somebody has to shut their doors if that's how they make a living. I think trusting people to do the right thing, but also the necessary thing, which is to provide for their families, isn't something that I should tell someone how to do that for. And then taxes. We're one of the highest tax states in the nation, and that's, I think, primarily where we get to the surplus and some of the things that have gone on and why things haven't moved, because people are hurting right now, especially in the economy with inflation going where it's at and gas prices and everything, and it needs to get back to people. But education and then public safety, our neighborhoods should be our favorite places. And
Thank you, Chris. Matt?
Thanks, Jody. And yes, I agree with the positions that have been stated. I will continue to work very hard to make healthcare more accessible and affordable and quality in this state. We can do that by lowering health insurance costs through a public health insurance option. We can do that by regulating pharmaceutical prices so that patients aren't being bilked immorally for their medications. In a season of surplus, Minnesotans expect to receive tax relief, and they should. I support the elimination of the Social Security tax, and I support broad-based property tax relief. And I think it's time that we fully invest in our public schools and rebuild education and help them find their way out of this pandemic and continue that as a pillar of good living and a good economy in this state.
Along those same lines, if elected, what committee assignments will you seek and why? And we go to Matt.
All right. Well, I'm currently on the Health and Human Services Committee. As the sole physician in the Senate, I'll continue to serve in that capacity. And I'm on the Taxes Committee, and I'm actually the DFL lead on the Property Tax Committee. And I will continue to serve on those committees as well. Rick and I both serve on the Legislative Audit Commission, which is probably something that very few Minnesotans know about, but is something that is defending their interests fiercely every day. And that is where citizens have the opportunity to ask the legislature to investigate something that has gone wrong with government operations, most recently the transit system in Minneapolis. And say, where did the money go? How did it get misspent? How are we going to fix it? And that commission is hugely important. It's nonpartisan, and I will have the honor to continue to serve on that.
Thank you. Rick?
Well, I would ask for the same committees, and hopefully we're in the majority, so that I would continue to be chair of the Environment and Natural Resources Finance Committee. That oversees the budgets for the Department of Natural Resources, the Pollution Control Agency, the Board of Water and Soil Resources, the Minnesota Zoo, the Science Museum, and some of the sewers and Met Council. So it's a pretty broad thing, and I'd like to work on that again, because we've got a number of proposals that we could achieve. I would also ask to be on the Ag Committee. We haven't really talked about food, but I think we all eat, and good food and clean food and pollinator-friendly food, those are all things that we can be working on in agriculture, and just because we're in the metro area doesn't mean we're not concerned about agriculture. And then finally, capital investment back to infrastructure, sewer and water, roads, bridges, transit, things that are capital in nature that last a long time, that are public investment. I think we actually should call that the Public Works Committee.
Thank you. And Chris?
I think it's natural. Transportation, it's what I'm in, and I believe doing that safely and efficiently, and I know schools with their budgets where they're at it's a big challenge right now. Public safety, supporting our law officers to have the equipment they need, the training they need, and standing with them in the hardest of times, but also operating in the community. I've done a lot of hours within the mission field around the world. I've been in homeless shelters and sat with people many times, and one size doesn't fit all, but I love the community level side of that. So I think anything across the board that someone would invite me to in that space. My wife's a youth pastor, so I love teenagers and kids and all that. I'd be an honor.
Well, that concludes our questions. So now we go for your 1-minute closing statements. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we'll reverse the order of the opening statements. So we begin with Senate 53 candidate, Chris.
Thank you, and thanks for everyone tuning in and joining, and fellow gentlemen sitting next to me. There's a lot going on in our world. I've said that. And I think some men and women of character need to stand up for truth, honesty, trust, some common sense. I think that we deserve better than the status quo of what's been going on, and I don't think we've gone the right way these last 2 years. It's been if you just look at fruit, I thought things were going pretty good, not commenting on the rhetoric, but under Trump, I thought things were going pretty well. And then the current president that's in there, I don't know what has gotten better. And I think the citizens and my neighbors and the people of this country feel that way, and they're angry. But that's also brought me to this table. So I'm very honored to be sitting here and also value people, but talk about the issues in a hopefully lengthier setting.
Thank you, Chris. Senate 53 candidate, Matt.
Well, thank you, Jodi, and thank you so much to the League of Women Voters for having this forum. It's really just never been more important that there was an organization like the League. It may be cliche, but it is true that our democracy is under threat and the truth is under attack. And this election will put that to the test in the most serious way. Holding a forum like this where we speak with our colleagues and with our opponents and allow voters to decide who they're going to vote for is the essence of why this country and this state are great. I've been proud over the last couple of years to stand up on the Senate floor and speak about truth and about scientific integrity and about honesty in a time when I never thought I would have to defend those simple ideals before Minnesotans. That's what I'd like to continue to do, and I'll ask for your vote.
Thank you. And House 53B candidate, Rick.
Thank you. You know, I have been in the legislature for a while, and what I've noticed is that the well-off and the well-connected always have access to power. And when I go and knock on doors, I find people who are not well-off and well-connected. And our role as legislators is to speak for them if we have the honor of being elected. I have been elected, and I appreciate that honor. The well-off and the well-connected will always have representation. I want to work for you. I have the knowledge, skills, and abilities and experience to make things happen. I can get things done. It's not easy. Sometimes it's not pleasant, but life is a challenge. And so I'm asking for your vote, whether you live in Newport or St. Paul Park or a little bit of Cottage Grove or northern Greycloud Island or northern Inver Grove or South St. Paul. I want to work for you. I ask for your support, and I look forward to meeting you in the next few weeks.
Well, thank you. That concludes our candidate forum, and we want to thank our candidates, you guys, for participating in this important candidate forum. And we want to thank our timekeepers for keeping us on track. And I want to thank everyone watching this broadcast on SWCTC and Town Square TV, and we encourage everyone listening to this broadcast to exercise their right to vote. Now, here again is Andrea Hable, again with the Woodbury Cottage Grove Area League of Women Voters for some final comments.
Thank you, Jodi. This concludes our forum for the candidates running for Senate District 53 and House District 53B seats. Thank you to the candidates for your participation tonight and for choosing to run for office. Thank you to all those who viewed the forum live tonight or who will view it, the recording between now and the election. This is the 7th of 8 candidate forums that the League of Women Voters, Woodbury Cottage Grove area have hosted this September. The forums are one of our most important services to the community. Last year we had over 3,000 views of our forums. Our last forum coming up shortly is the Newport City Council, and that will begin at 8:15 this evening for those of you who are watching live. Replays of all of our other forums are available to watch online. Those includes the forums you've watched tonight, as well as the Washington County Commissioner Districts 2, 4, and 5, Woodbury City Council, and the State House and Senate Districts 41, 47, and Newport City Council. The videos are on YouTube, and you can get to those through the South Washington County Telecommunications Commission website, which is swctc.org. Again, that's swctc.org, and that will link to all of the videos. Please make every effort to become informed about the candidates running for office and on all of this year's options for your ballot this year. And most importantly, get out and vote. So we'll now take a brief break before returning with the Newport City Council Candidate Forum. Thank you.